Part 1 of this documentary detailed how the people behind the hugely successful channels Collider and Screen Junkies lost touch with their fans, forgot what made their channels successful until ultimately these channels lost relevance and faded into obscurity. Part 2 will be exploring how the division and fracturing of these fan bases resulted in the current movie review / fandom landscape on YouTube. How YouTube channels die is a really interesting concept, and one in which I might explore in more detail one day. I remember in around when YouTube replaced television for myself, roughly about 10 years ago, I thought about how long certain channels would run for, given that the vast majority of channels are largely independent but no network to cancel them. Traditional television shows may be cancelled due to a number of reasons: lack of viewership, a $1 million extreme situation where the show is cancelled for political reasons, or due to a scenario like the cancellation of Daredevil, where the ownership of rights is what cancelled an otherwise outstanding show. YouTube channels can die either via the quick death or slow burn. The death of Toby Turner's channel, Bashers, or EDPs, is an example of the quick death, where the creator is accused of or just flat out guilty of criminal behaviour, and fans rightly decide to cease supporting that channel. However, the fall of most dead YouTube channels throughout the years is due to the slow burn effect. There are two ways in which the slow burn effect usually comes to fruition. The first one is where a channel never innovates. They make it big with one format and continue to milk that format for years and years until their audience grows up, moves on, or competition which is more authentic, entertaining, and hungry for success emerges. Examples of this is the likes of Matthew Santoro or the Fine Brothers. A great example of someone who's managed to stay at the top over the years is PewDiePie, who experimented and freshened up his content every few years, going from Let's Plays to his meme reviews to commentary videos and back to Let's Plays. Or Red Letter Media, who started making Plinkett reviews before they made their own reviews called Half in the Bag, bringing out Best of the Worst, Review, as well as more laid back videos where Rich, Jay and Mike just comment on movies. The other example of the slow burn is when the relationship between a creator and their audience slowly disintegrates. Many creators and their fans have a sort of parasocial relationship due to the more personable and laid back nature of YouTube videos, contrasted with the likes of a Hollywood movie. Fans may see their favourite YouTuber as someone they can relate to and someone that they may get on with in real life. But as time goes on, this image completely shatters, whether it's down to the creator amassing a large amount of wealth and losing touch, or the creator's real personality shining through. H3H3 as well as Boogie2988 are probably the best example of these. Boogie, who was seen as a wholesome and kind person who battled through a tough life, slowly exposed himself as someone who was acting all along and was actually a pretty toxic person.
Yeah, so fuck her. And now she's dead. Actually, both of them are. The girl is dead, my mom is dead, everyone I know and love is dead. Wait, the girl died? Whoa! She died at 39 of like fucking lung cancer. She had breast cancer and they beat the breast cancer, but then the treatment for the breast cancer gave her lung cancer. Oh my god, that sounds absolutely terrible. Yeah, it was fucking awful. Yeah. I'm sorry you had to go through that, bro. Yeah, that's okay. Alright, I mean, I didn't go through it. I'm still alive. She's dead. Damn, brutal. Yeah. I'm serious. You know, she like, why do I get to complain? She's the one that has to be dead. You know, fuck.
My breakdown of the fall of Collider and Screen Junkies are an example of the slow burn death of channels, where the fans of these channels viewed the personalities on them as a group of relatable and friendly people. Constant political lecturing and comical shilling, this image was dashed and fans slowly dipped off over the course of 2 years, until shows which used to pull over 400,000 views a week now only made about 10 to 20,000 views. Mark Fernandez's legacy on the internet is the man who pulled the plug on many once beloved shows and laid off a large group of people without notice right after Christmas. However, upon looking into the cancellation of Collider, Fernandez comes across as more of a boss who is incompetent, in over his head, and the victim of bad timing as opposed to a ruthless businessman. The timing of Fernandez's purchase of Collider was almost comically unlucky. He bought the business in February of 2018, 1 month after the release of Star Wars The Last Jedi. This was effectively the movie that above all fractured any semblance of a relationship between Hollywood and everyday ordinary fans, the access media and LA critics, where it became apparent that now more than ever Hollywood prioritised political messaging above writing and entertainment. The likes of people who worked at Collider would inevitably side with Hollywood to safeguard their access to premieres, media junkets and their celebrity contacts. But as I stated in part 1, this was the beginning of the end for the channel. So effectively, Mark Fernandez bought the Titanic right after it hit the iceberg. Right as Fernandez purchased Collider, the shilling nature of Collider began to become exposed to their fans. Popular shows that once anchored Collider, such as Jedi Council, Heroes and Movie Talk, began to lose views, and channels that would provide strong competition to Collider now began to gain in popularity. Fernandez and Harloff clearly realised this and sought to branch out and change up Collider's content, creating other channels such as Collider Extras, some sports-related shows, as well as Collider Podcasts, an attempt to jump on the ever-growing podcast trend, which had been hugely popularised in recent years by Joe Rogan. Collider Podcasts was far from a disaster. Videos on the channel would regularly bring in anywhere from 10 to 50,000 views, decent numbers for an independent channel, but not for a channel trying to pay overheads such as a studio in LA, podcast equipment, and a large cast of personalities, all of which Fernandez needed to pay a decent LA living wage to. The standard format for many podcasts which Rogan set out was to upload the podcast in full, then splice in smaller highlight videos with the person's face on the thumbnail and an attention-grabbing title. Given the caliber of interesting guests and topics Rogan and others in that space would have on, it's easy to see why such highlight videos were a great way of getting the podcast to go viral. However, Collider's attempt at this would not bear any real fruit, and it's easy to see why. People would click onto Rogan's highlights to see people like Sam Harris, Post Malone, Robert Downey Jr., Mike Tyson, and of course Alex Jones. But who really cared about Collider's podcast highlights, such as Roxy experimented in college, other than you-know-who of course. Views for Collider would continually drop, the channel would be left without any real interesting personalities after both Campea and the Schmoes left, until Fernandez would pull the plug in early 2020. There was a massive outrage over this, as the entire cast were sacked right after Christmas with zero notice. The announcement was also made over Twitter, rather than on Collider's YouTube channel, where they could have at least give the remaining fans some sort of finale show. Things were made worse for Collider when one of the few Collider employees to be kept on, Jack Hind, decided to belittle the employees who were sacked and mocked the show's previous content. This rubbed people the wrong way, as Hind was never really a part of the Collider cast, just a background figure who'd done work for Fernandez and now got to keep his job. Many fans and ex-Collider staff would call out Hind for his tasteless remarks, all of which served to heap more and more pressure on Fernandez. John Campea himself, the man who built Collider, would come out of the woodwork on his channel to flame both Hind for his comments and Fernandez for his handling of the situation. John's passionate response won over a lot of Collider fans to his channel. Cringy insults from Campea aside, of course.
Nobody knows the fucking name Collider Video if it wasn't for all those people and all those shows and that community that was built, and 600,000 subscribers later, none of that exists. And this rolling around in his diapers Jack Hind Dick Zit wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for all those things. All right? But they pulled the plug on it. Okay, new direction. I get it. It happens. Fine. This jackass, this insufferable little fucktwit gets on Twitter yesterday. And I'm going to show you what this kid, now this kid, Jack Hind, he is the number 2 guy from everything that I'm told. He is the number 2 guy over at Collider. He is the number 2 guy over at Collider, okay? Other than the big guy who owns it, next, the most influential guy over there is this kid, Jack Hind, who I don't even know if he's reached puberty yet.
Due to the immense amount of pressure and hatred being thrown Collider's way, Fernandez came out making a video on the Collider channel where he apologised for Hind's comments, explained the reasons for the cancellation of the shows, and paid tribute to the cast members which he let go. However, this video didn't come off really well due to Fernandez's body language, not looking at the camera, and really only making the video praising his staff due to the pressure that he was being put under.
Movie Talk and Collider Live were really the brainchild of other people that are still doing it, and frankly, we're doing it more effectively than us, with John and his show and Christian and his show. And these are wonderful shows, and I encourage you to support both of them. But, you know, for us to compete in that space directly at them just wasn't smart anymore. And I tried, man. Trust me, I tried.
Campea and Fernandez would eventually make a video together where they hashed things out. Campea was able to voice his criticisms and allowed Fernandez to respond to some of these criticisms, while Collider would go on trying to make certain videos such as their Deep Fake series and celebrity interviews. The channel effectively died from here on in. While I stated in part 1 that the only member of the Screen Junkies or Collider crew to be successful after those channels was ironically Andy Signore, I was more referring to the last remnants of the Collider crew who tried to start up channels afterwards, such as Roxy Stryer, John Roca and Jay Washington. The two biggest personalities from Collider who left before its demise have managed to find some success afterwards with their own channels, namely John Campea and Christian Harloff. Campea has had much more success than Harloff, however, more than likely due to the fact he jumped off the Collider train well before the brand's reputation and those who were part of it became irreparably damaged. While I'm not a fan of Campea, he's been guilty of corporate shilling on more than one occasion, he's among the worst for lecturing fans on politics. He is undoubtedly a talented businessman, having built up 2 successful channels from scratch. He's also someone whose opinion is largely respected by his fans. Campea has since been involved in a few controversies, notably when he was almost cancelled by trans rights activists for referencing Elliot Page's former name, Ellen Page, in a completely innocuous way.
Earlier today on the John Campea Show, on Wednesday, December 2nd, on the John Campea Show, one of the issues that we talked about and a topic that came up was the fact that Elliot Page, who we have known for the last number of years as Ellen Page, who now identifies as transgender and uses the pronoun he, and we were talking about how will that have any effect on Umbrella Academy, the show they currently star on, as, you know, and they star as a cisgendered female in the show. So it raised the question, what, if anything, will this have an impact on the show or the character? Now, as we discussed in the show today, it wasn't going to affect it at all. There's no effect going on, and that's a good thing. There shouldn't be any impact on that, and I was quite clear in that. Now, here's the title that I made the video and the topic. How does Ellen Page's transition to Elliot Page affect Umbrella Academy? It was a title that I felt was clear. It was a title that I felt was descriptive. It was a title that I felt truly communicated what the subject matter of the topic was, simply for clarity and for understanding, so everybody who saw the headline would know who we're talking about and what we're talking about. And I thought, I mean, I was very specific to make sure I used, their new name, Elliot Page, in the title, but also for people who had no idea about this transition, I also wanted to make sure we identified so people would know who exactly it is we're talking about. So I used Ellen's former name, Ellen Page, just so for clarity. Now, since in the hours that have passed since I wrote that, I've gotten several very angry messages from people, both in the comments section, on my Instagram, all over the place, telling me that it was incredibly disrespectful for me to use Elliot Page's, a phrase I'd never heard before, dead name. I guess, when somebody becomes transgendered, or maybe it exceeds more than just transgendered people in that community. Maybe it's used in other situations as well. But I'd never heard the term dead name before. And I was lectured by many people that it was the height of inconsiderate behavior.
Campea would rightly come out with a statement after the fact, effectively saying that this sort of hostility demonstrated by the trans rights crowd toward people who mildly set outside their narrow boundaries of what's acceptable, but who are actually sympathetic towards their cause, such as John, is a reason why more people are reluctant to support them. Campea would also later go on to have a go at people who argued against political messaging and the diversity over storytelling approach of Disney, until he was embarrassingly checked by his female co-host, who stated that she was too tired of the approach of corporations who are more interested in marketing a new show as being female-led, as opposed to a show with an interesting or original storyline.
Listen, I can already hear the man babies crying about, why is it female-centric? There's an agenda. Listen, let's just put that to bed and not touch on this again, shall we? They've already got 3 other series coming that are all male lead, okay? That means right now, if this comes out and it's only 4 shows, that's 75% of their male lead. They got one that's going to happen to be a female lead one. Deal with it and just move on. So can we move on from that? Thank you.
You're going to be a little surprised about what I have to say, though.
Okay.
I really, really loathe the descriptor of female-led, because here's why. I love the idea of a predominantly female cast. I think it's fantastic. But my problem is, why are you only releasing the fact that it's a female-centric show? Oh, and they're going to be doing some kung fu or whatever. Like, why say that? Can you read me the headline again? Except take out female-centric and just put male-centric.
The most notable controversy from Campea to date was when he reposted leaked photos of the highly anticipated Spider-Man No Way Home movie, showing that Daredevil will be in the film, as well as confirming that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire would feature in the film as well. This controversy was notable for a few reasons. Firstly, Campea watermarked the photos, which were obviously not his, knowing that the photos would go hugely viral, resulting in a big boost for his brand. However, when Sony went on the offensive, Campea would completely backtrack, implying he never thought the pictures were real to begin with, essentially that he was sharing them for fun, likely in an attempt to avoid getting in trouble with Sony for spoiling one of their biggest movies ever. However, this gave rise to an obvious contradiction, namely why would he watermark someone else's photos, something which he was never able to convincingly explain. Despite this, Campea would continue to be decently successful on YouTube, and his style of releasing multiple videos a day, reaching around 10 to 50,000 views every week, would keep his channel ticking along. I find the place where Christian Harloff ended up to be a far more interesting story, however. Christian was always a more likeable figure than Campea, at least in my opinion. He wasn't as combative, arrogant, and gave off a everyday blue-collar sort of feel, evident in his YouTube channel's name, Schmoes Know. Christian seemed to me like a man who was pulled in two completely opposite and incongruent directions. He's a man that grew up in the 80s, 90s in Queens, New York, being a big fan of the New York comedy scene, as well as pro wrestling. However, his career path would later pull him into the Hollywood scene in LA, swapping out NY comics for wannabe LA actors. It's hard to imagine more of a conflicting crowd. And to me personally at least, it always seemed as if Christian has been holding his tongue multiple times throughout the years on Collider, wanting to get into more real topics, give his uncensored opinion, and tell more edgy jokes. But it's obvious to see that his career would not have lasted long in LA if he hadn't conformed to the ultra-woke Hollywood crowd. However, it's arguable that his career would have been better served in the long run if he had ditched these Hollywood types and taken a more authentic approach, which would have saved his reputation among fans of his that left throughout the years. I think the infamous meltdown Christian had with his producer on Collider that I discussed in part 1 demonstrates this. The line, "I've been busting my ass being a Star Wars fan," has been memed to death, as being the ultimate sort of LA shill line. But I think it's more of an actual admission by Christian that he's long since held his tongue and sheeted his opinions on Star Wars in exchange for the benefits he's been getting. But now that he was overlooked by a major event in Disney Star Wars, namely the opening of Galaxy's Edge, all of this shilling and trading in of his credibility now seemed as if it was not worth it.
I don't want to say like, well, Jermaine Lucier, who goes to fucking everything, he reported on this, so I'm going to go off his report.
If you had been invited and you...
Guess what? I'm not. I've been busting my fucking ass being a Star Wars fan for 5 fucking years.
I feel
on
the
show.
same way about...
I've been called shill. I get screamed at. So let this one, let me be a fucking shill for this one. Let me go and experience this fucking thing. And maybe I don't even like it, but I wanted to go.
I completely agree.
I wanted to go. And the fact that it wasn't even... It would have been a thing, you know what, I would have still covered it if they wrote back and we said, we're sorry we missed you on this one. Our spots are all full at the moment. Thank you for promoting us in general.
Response.
No response. And it's like, fuck off.
Christian would go back onto his Schmoes Know channel after leaving Collider, as well as starting his own channel. But this was arguably too little too late, as the Schmoes channel had been long since neglected due to Mark and Christian's work on Collider. Both men's reputations also became synonymous with corporate shilling, and their once successful trivia show, The Schmodown, was warped from a simple movie trivia quiz show into an embarrassing pro wrestling drama show. All subgrowth on the channel would effectively cease, and it would be extremely rare for a video on the Schmoes Know channel to reach over 10,000 views. Christian would go on to focus on his own channel, something which he should have done years ago. As I said, this was too little too late, with the channel only performing decently well, barely hitting 50,000 subs with low views on each video. Albeit surely enough to sustain Christian, as he is now for the first time in a long time independent, without a large cast and crew to make money for. As I previously stated, Harloff is a man who's pulled in two different lanes, the woke Hollywood scene, and his own ambitions of turning the Schmoes into a more edgy Howard Stern type show.
Some of you probably saw on your social media feeds this hoopla that started up a couple of days ago because of this poster. It's an X-Men Apocalypse poster where in it we see Apocalypse with one hand choking out Mystique. Now it's a simple poster, whatever. It's setting up who the bad guy, who the villain is, and clearly he's so powerful, he's taking out what has been the main character, rightly or wrongly, I think wrongly, the main character of this new X-Men franchise since First Class, into Days of Future Past, into X-Men Apocalypse.
Well, when I saw it, I was appalled, honestly. Okay. So when I first saw it, I was like, why aren't there more people complaining about this? Like, I cannot believe that this is the billboard. So when I saw this question come up, I'm like, okay, at least people are talking about it, because from a woman's standpoint, one thing, it's violent. So I don't understand. I know that there's a ton of violence in movies and video games, and like people are drawn to that. But why does that have to be the main advertisement for it? And then why does it have to be a woman who's painted, looks like she's naked, held by the throat? It's just by this strong man and this weak woman. I mean, I never get into like feminist things or anything like that, but this billboard, I was so upset by it. Be another poster with her on it. It doesn't have to be just her.
You don't mind the scene in the
being
movie,
choked.
just the fact that they're marketing it.
Yeah, it's just like
okay.
it's that picture, nothing else.
Right.
It's just like strong man, weak woman getting choked.
It's quite possible that Harloff would have salvaged a lot of his credibility and fans if he was more candid about his experiences on Collider, the pressure to maintain relationships with movie studios, and perhaps even reaching out to channels on the other side of the lane, such as Geeks and Gamers and Critical Drinker.
Comment there. But he made this final comment about it would have been different if they would have followed up with me, responded to me, and said, "Thank you, man. Thank you for all of your promotion, and we're sorry. We'll get you next time." But since they didn't, his exact words were "F them." Right? Okay. Well, let's go back to July 10th of 2018. Christian Harloff decided to follow the Geeks and Gamers account on Twitter. This was back when I was getting a lot of traction for my anti-Last Jedi videos and my Kathleen Kennedy videos. I was getting a lot of traction. He decided to follow. Well, my social media team is always keeping tabs on what's going on. I know what people say about me. I know what people say about Geeks and Gamers. Myself and my team, we sit there and laugh about it because we're like, these people are crazy. Like, they're absolutely insane. But we follow this stuff. When Christian followed our account, people pay attention to these things. And people on social media started saying, Christian Harloff, he's part of the whatever labels they're throwing at me and Geeks and Gamers. I was seeing it. My team was showing me these things. So I decided I would reach out to Christian and let him know, just as a sign of respect and courtesy. Hey, Christian. We don't know each other particularly well. I'm a huge fan of yours. Since you're following my website account, people are now trying to weaponize that to go after you. It's part of this insane Star Wars culture war going on. These people are looking for anything to create controversy. The reason I'm messaging you is because I highly respect you. If you need to distance yourself from my page, feel free to do so. No hard feelings. I don't want to see you get caught up in all of this nonsense going on. I'm fine being part of it, but I just wanted to give you a friendly heads up as to what's going on. Jeremy at D-Day Cobra. I then said, like, of course, none of them, just, talking about the charity events and the positive things we do that nobody wants to mention. And so what does he do? Well, let's just one more time. One more time, okay?
Thing. Maybe I don't even like it. I wanted to go. And the fact that it would have been a thing, you know what, I would have still covered it if they wrote back and we said, we're sorry we missed you on this one. Our spots are all full at the moment. Thank you for promoting us in general.
No response.
No response. And it's like, fuck off.
So there was absolutely no reason for me to do this. None. I simply did this out of respect in private. And I have not talked about this message for over a year because there was no need to. Did I think when he unfollowed with no response, did I think, that's kind of a dick move? Of course I did. Whatever. It is what it is. It wasn't no big deal. But I did think, I was like, it's kind of a dick move, dude. Like, I was just trying to give you a heads up as to, like, what following my account might bring you. I didn't have to do that. I did that out of respect. I even told you I was a fan. And I wasn't worth a response from the great Christian Harloff. Again, is what it is, not really a big deal. But when you hear him say that no response means to F off, it's interesting how he doesn't live by that same philosophy.
Instead, Harloff would well and truly choose the lane he wanted to be in, by doing something that would effectively relegate his audience and the schmoes to only a channel with the most rabid left-wing cancel culture audience. This was, of course, the cancellation of Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert Meyer Burnett, like John Schnepp, was one of the very few personalities in the Collider space that was universally liked. He also added an instant credibility to any show that he was on, having previously worked in Hollywood both as a producer and a writer. Robert gave off an extremely friendly and likeable impression to any show he was on. He was also one of the few personalities from the Collider space to reach across the lane and interact with Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, as well as regularly appearing on Critical Drinkers podcasts, demonstrating that people with different politics can put those differences aside and in fact be extremely friendly with each other. During the 2020 BLM riots, looting and criminality was rife across many cities in the US, with looters frequently burning down private property and clashing with police. One such notable and tragic incident was the shooting of David Dorn, a 77-year-old retired police captain who was fatally shot after interrupting a burglary of a pawn shop in the Ville, St. Louis. Seeing the images of the elderly Dorn lying dead on the sidewalk, Burnett exploded on Twitter urging people in self-defense situations to shoot to kill. While these tweets out of context seem to be quite extreme, this was a highly emotional time, and it's obvious to see how such a reckless criminality and needless murder of a 77-year-old retired man just simply trying to help could provoke such a reaction. Despite the fact Burnett was advocating for a murdered elderly African-American man during the BLM riots, this didn't stop many people, including Schmoes personalities, from being outraged by Burnett's tweets. Notably, former Schmoedown personality Robert Butler would accuse Burnett of promoting right-wing extremist ideology. Christian Harloff would ultimately side in favour of the cancel culture mob and instantly sack a man who he'd been friends with and worked with for many years. This was another no-going back period for Christian and the Schmoes. I'd like to think people in real life with genuine real friends out there wouldn't just drop them at a moment's notice because of a bunch of easily offended anonymous accounts on Twitter or barking at them. But Christian took the easy route, the route that's become so prevalent in Hollywood in recent years, and chose to fire and demonize a genuinely decent man. Campea would also briefly remove Rob from the show, but at least to his credit would shortly bring back Burnett onto his show. This was another nail in the coffin for these movie review channels, and really revealed yet again the sort of place that Hollywood truly is. A place where you throw your friends to the wolves to save yourself, ignoring any context to appease the mob. It is likely that this is another point in which people decided to depart from the Schmoes and the ex-Collider alum. Christian had a chance to break away from this crowd and decided to ultimately double down in favour of the woke Hollywood crowd. The end result of the death of Collider and Screen Junkies was a massive fracturing of a fan base across YouTube, where before in the early 2010s, movie fans were localised within the Screen Junkies, Jeremy Johns, Chris Stuckman, Collider and Red Letter Media, to now being spread across YouTube in many different directions. More right-leaning, centrist and anti-Hollywood establishment fans have found a community within Geeks and Gamers, Nerdrotic, Drunk 3PO and Young Rippa. Mauler and Rags cater to more critical long-form content on their channels, as well as their hugely successful podcast EFAP. John Campea has managed to stay relatively successful, likely being the place that many Collider fans migrated to after the channel's demise. Jeremy Johns and Chris Stuckman have managed to keep their fan bases by staying true to themselves, while Red Letter Media have maintained huge success by gradually bringing in new shows every so often, as well as avoiding any sort of parasocial relationship with their fans. No YouTube channel will last forever, either due to the creator losing interest and moving on, some scandal that takes them down, or just fans becoming bored with the channel's content. But it's hard to argue that had Collider, Screen Junkies and the Schmoes stuck true to their original review format, avoided becoming too embroiled in politics, Hollywood, and the access media, that they could not have still been a major force in the YouTube movie review landscape to this day.